This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. I had a question from Patreon member Thomas, and I like to try, if I've got a question that like this one I think might be relevant to each of us, or people that do ask me about sort of teaching and stuff, then I like to share that. So if you've got questions for me, Patreon is a good place to ask them, or email, and I can try and make a video talking about my approach on it for whatever that's worth. So he was asking kind of a two-part question. One was, is ear training worth it? And B, is there any sort of secret sauce to kind of chord progressions and practicing chord progressions? So I think for me, this is kind of answered by one type of exercise and one kind of concept. So that's what I wanted to address here. And I think the real heart of it, for a lot of pop music and a lot of what you hear me doing, and so that's generally going to be the context here. I'm not necessarily talking about Eastern music or classical music or even jazz in this context for this video right now, but kind of popular music, rock music. Generally, we're going to be thinking about the major key. Hold on, I'm getting a phone call. Hello.
Hello, sorry, I walked Elodie to the cafe and back.
Yeah.
Wow, actually the traffic's looking horrific. So yeah, more 20 past.
Alright, bye.
Alright then, bye.
So, here's the real principle here, is that you need to have a good understanding of the major scale. Now, there's two systems that are actually pretty much the same. One comes from classical music, which is where I first encountered it, and the other comes from like what they call the Nashville number system. The idea being that if you're in the key of G, for example, you've got chord 1, which is your G major, and if you harmonize the scale, chord 2 you get A minor, chord 3 is B minor, chord 4 is C major, major 7 if you want to go all the way, chord 5 is D, chord 6 is E minor, and here's a chord we don't really need to worry about, right? So early on, I spent a lot of time learning loads and loads and loads of songs, just playing chords. I think probably like most of you, what I spent a lot of time doing with these kind of things and in my head, what I'm thinking of when I'm doing this sort of thing is like 1, 4, 5, right? So 1, 4, 5, 1. Now what's cool about that, and you've seen loads of people do this, but to varying levels, so this is a thing that I would do a lot of. If you kind of think 1, 4, 5 in a difficult key, for example, like D flat major, 1, 4, 5, or I don't know, F sharp major, 1, 4, 5. So that is, I think, the real heart of getting this chord progression thing going, is that you make the thing generic so that you could play it in any key, first of all. And for me personally, because I did a lot of this, and probably because I started this early, I can kind of hear just by instinct, you know, that it's going from chord 1 to chord 6, chord 4 to chord 5. So anything that stays in key like that, I think, for my ears personally, is quite simple. Here's the other thing. So I was learning for this wedding that I'm playing tomorrow, Amazed by Lone Star, which is kind of actually in a capo key, but we're going to be playing it in G. And I was listening to it, I'm thinking that's a really complicated progression. Now, what you should really be thinking is, right, let's break this thing apart. And most progressions are pretty simple, and most progressions kind of repeat. So if it's something that's relatively complicated, like I was playing in the intro, chord 1, chord 5, chord 6, chord 4. So that could be a whole song these days. Okay, and then it moves to this B flat. Okay. So which I'm hearing is chord 1, so we then move to B flat. And if you imagine in B flat, chord 1, chord 5, chord 6, chord 4. Okay, so now we've got 2 progressions, right? And just across 2 different keys. That actually becomes quite simple. 1, 5, 6, 4. Then 1, 5, 6, 4. It's just in the next kind of home key, and then it moves to C, 5, 6, 4. So you see, like, you can make a whole song which sounds really incredible out of the same chord progression but in different keys. I just wanted to share that, as I thought that was quite a cool thing. I've not really even thought about it till right now when this question was asked of me, but I think a real key to this chord progression stuff is trying to get to that next place where you're able to play in lots of different keys the same thing, and that is a lot of what music is about, right? And so a capo can be a really good tool for this, because you can take things you know and get used to the idea of, like, that being chord 1 if you're playing in the D shape, chord 5, chord 6, chord 4. Or if you're in the E shape, chord 1, chord 5, chord 6, chord 4. If you're in the C shape, chord 1, chord 5, chord 6, chord 4. Do we have another? C, A, G, E, D, and we already done the G. The cage system could be a really good thing for that to start with. And the other thing that I would say is that there are really common chords that you will find in any key. So 1, 4, 5, obviously, and then 6, 2, 3. So if you know your chord family quite well, you can quite quickly kind of just start to deduce, like, is it a major chord, is it a minor chord? Okay, it's a major chord, which most likely chord 1, chord 4 or chord 5. Is it a minor chord? Oh, right, yes. So is it 2, 3 or 6? If it's outside of that, then it's going to be a little bit more work, and those are the things that maybe catch me out a little bit more, where I have to listen a bit more. But the basic stuff in most pop music is actually pretty basic once you get the understanding of the key down. So I think that's kind of my suggestion on the progressions. Then you don't always have to start on your home. So a progression starting from chord 4, 5. So yeah, your progression doesn't have to start on chord 1, right? So say I'm thinking now that I'm in G major, and this is a big thing that maybe like the 1975 do. Say I'm in G major. So I'm thinking chord 5, chord 3, chord 4, chord 6, 5. Okay, so what could we take from that chord progression if you know the song it's 2-time by 1975? So we can make that kind of thing generic, and chord progressions in general we're allowed to rip off to some extent, unless you're Ed Sheeran. You've got to be a bit careful with it, I guess, but chord progressions themselves are not copyrighted in general. So, like that little... We could move that into other keys. So what is it? 5. So I'm in B flat now. So the 5 of B flat is F. 3, 4, E flat, G minor, F. We could even just do like that, the what was it? The Lone Star thing, and we could choose like 3 different keys that are kind of doing it. You see what I mean? So a chord progression, I would encourage you, in most cases in pop music, is definitely within your grasp to work it out. It's not necessarily super special kind of work, but what makes it really easy is having the knowledge of, right, a G major song in G major is going to have your G major, it might have a C major, it might have a D major, it might have an E minor, it might have an A minor, it might have a B minor. If you can figure out where sounds like home, and this might not always work terribly well, but this is the general principle, having a good idea about where we're at and what's happening, then it becomes quite straightforward to figure out what's happening. So that's a progression, again, that you could take and you could just turn that into your own thing. Maybe you think, right, what would that sound like in E flat major? Chord 1. It's harder to do if you're doing the melody as well, but I basically know that if I'm in E flat, I don't have to think too hard about it. I can kind of just track the movements. You know, chord 1, chord 4, 5. I think that is how, for me, I think about chord progressions, and that's kind of my system for it. It's not something I invented. The Roman numeral system existed around kind of the time of Bach, and before that, Bach chorales, you do this sort of thing. The Nashville number system is kind of like the same thing, but that is kind of the glue that can really make this chord progression stuff make a bit more sense and enable you to manipulate chord progressions and find things that you found. That for me is the secret sauce, is that I'm always listening to other chord progressions and trying to recognize things where they're similar, if that makes sense, and look for repetitive things, because a lot of chord progressions really are. Hopefully that's vaguely helpful, Thomas. Yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and Patreon, the place to shoot me emails if you want to make suggestions for videos on topics that might help slightly. Cheers!